Hello, friends. Thank you so much for joining. We're going to give a few minutes to let other participants join us, and then we will begin our video. Thank you so much for being with us today. Good afternoon, friends. Thank you so much for joining. We are going to wait about 2 more minutes so that others can join in, and then we'll begin our webinar. Thank you for being with us. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Shannon Royce with the Christian Employers Alliance, and we're so happy to have you join us for our inaugural webinar of this year, Leading Effectively in a Distrustful World. We're so honored to have Dr. Asa Swan lead us in our conversation. Dr. Swan is the founder and CEO of Great Leaders, a dynamic leadership-focused organization dedicated to creating gritty, relational, equipped, authentic, and transformational, or great leaders through coaching, training, and consulting. Asa is passionate about speaking on 360-degree leadership, history, workplace culture, and the powerful impact of faith on everyday life. He started Great Leaders to help anyone in business lead with excellence in the 21st century marketplace. Asa's background includes teaching at the college level, serving in D.C. as Hill staff to Congressman Ron Lewis and for the Senate Republican Conference. He also has served in state government as the first ever Chief Leadership Officer for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. The other Commonwealth I'm familiar with is Virginia, and was the first in the nation state Chief Leadership Officer. He was responsible for leading comprehensive training for emerging and established leaders at all levels across the public and private sectors of Kentucky. He also served the Kentucky Transportation Secretary as his Chief of Staff, and as a legislative liaison early in his career. He has a Ph.D. in modern European history from the University of Kentucky. He's married to Kentucky State Auditor Allison Ball and father to their 2 children, Levi and Marigold. We will be taking questions at the end of Dr. Swan's presentation, so please add your questions to the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Asa, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Shannon. Hello, everyone. It's great to be with you today. I'm really excited to spend some time just growing in our leadership. So I have a surprise to start us off. If you see the banner here behind me, I am coming to you from Wilmore, Kentucky, which is about 40 minutes from where I live in Frankfurt, our capital, from the campus of Asbury University. And I wanted to do that just as a way to encourage you in this new year that God is still very much so working in the world. And if you probably heard about it, but it's been about 11 months since the Asbury outpouring happened here on this campus, where God poured out his Spirit in an amazing way, and tens of thousands of people descended on this campus. Maybe you came. I got to come one time. My wife Allison came several times and just basked in the presence of the Lord. So here's the thing, even though it seems like the world gets a little darker every day, let's just remember that Jesus is on the throne. We have the victory through the cross and the empty tomb in him, and he is always at work, just like he showed us in the outpouring. So let's talk about our question for today. How do we lead effectively in an increasingly distrusting world? You know, I see a rapidly changing culture around us that is just full of constant virtue signaling and woke fakery and contradictory information that we're getting bombarded with. And I believe our teams are increasingly looking for authentic leaders who give consistent and clear cues all the time as they lead their teams. They want those leaders to resonate with their own common sense values. Now, good communication begins with our own self-leadership and how we lead those around us. So here's my goal for today. It's 3 parts. First, I want to encourage you, and then equip you, and then empower you to lead effectively in your crucial role as leaders. I want you to be confident in your leadership, and I want you to have effective communication in today's turbulent work environment. So this talk has 3 parts. First, we're going to talk about how we got here, the past. Then we're going to talk about how I believe leadership is operating today in the marketplace, so the present. And then finally, I want to give you some practical things that you can do after this talk to apply to your workplace in the future. So here we go. So I'm a historian, and questions of timing are tough. I always want to know, how did we get here? And to illustrate that, let me just say that several years ago, my parents were trying to lose 5 pounds, aren't we all? And they were on a diet. They'd been on it for a couple weeks. They were holding each other accountable. And my dad was driving down one of the 2 busiest streets in my hometown of Campbellsville, Kentucky. And he was hungry because, you know, he'd been hungry for 2 weeks. And he was about to drive past Bell Bakery. Now, I've had donuts all over the world. And I can honestly tell you that Bell Bakery had the best donuts I've ever had. Unfortunately, they've closed in the last several years, which is a loss for all of us, although it's probably good for our health. But a Bell's donut, especially their blueberry donuts, were amazing. And Dad is looking at Bell's coming up on the side of the road, and he's thinking, I would really love to get a Bell's right now. And then he thought, well, I'll do it. And they thought, no, Cinda, my mom, will kill me if I get a donut and she doesn't get one. And so, being a pastor, he went, Lord, if it be your will for me to go in and get a Bell's, let one of the 3 parking spaces in front of the building be open, and I'll know that you want me to get this donut. And the 5th time he drove around the building, it was. That's a true story. Okay. So questions of timing can be tough. My first question for you today is, have you noticed how distrusting everyone is becoming? Have you experienced it? Because I know I have it, not just in the workplace, but even out like in restaurants or at Walmart or just buying things. People don't believe me or aren't as quick to believe things as they were, are they? A few years ago, The Atlantic postulated that America's new motto is increasingly becoming "in nothing we trust," because the public institutions that were supposed to protect us, like the CDC, City Hall, the FBI, our schools, our churches, a lot of people in America think they failed them. We've been failed by them. And so they've lost trust in them. And I believe as a historian that that is a terrible tragedy in our public discourse, especially in the last 20 years, as we've seen this decreasing faith, just this downward slope of what people are willing to believe in. Now, people just don't know who to believe or what anymore. And here's the thing. Once you believe something and then you find out that you were wrong, you don't want to look like a fool and get burned again. So what does it make you? You're slower to trust again. And we're seeing that all across our society, and it's affecting the workplace. Gallup, a couple years ago, did a deep dive into this, and they looked at all these cultural institutions across American society, and they just asked the question, do you believe them, or do you believe in them? And what they found is since 9/11 in 2001, they found that trust has diminished by half. Half. It was about 2 out of 3 people said, yeah, I trust the Supreme Court, or I trust City Hall, or I trust my church. And now it's just over 30% in every one of these. So we've gone from 2 in 3 to just 1 in 3 people who are willing to believe, or at least believe, rather quickly. So how do we deal with that, especially as employers? So with so much misinformation and even disinformation, which we know is purposefully trying to mislead people, our employees are increasingly turning to their own discernment to decide how they feel about a leader and then figure out if they should trust us or not. So now that we know what the problem is, our work is to rebuild that trust. So let's talk about how leadership and communication are working in the workplace today. Now, self-awareness is also about seeing those around you, and not just having awareness of yourself. And what I want to do is I want to break this into 2 pieces. I want to give 2 truths for us as leaders, and then I want to talk about 2 truths for them. So here's the good news. Even though the pandemic has changed a lot of things about work and communication, the good news is that the needs that your team has, what they need from you as the leader, have not changed. They still need what they've needed throughout all of time in the ways that God has designed us. So let's talk about 2 truths about you and me as the leader. The first is what I believe is the beginning of all leadership training, and that is everyone takes their cues from the senior leader. My friends, I could talk about this for days. I'm not kidding. I could talk about this for hours and hours. Everyone takes their cues from the senior leader. What do I mean by that? Well, we're comparative, aren't we? When we come into a space, we look at it and we're thinking about what's this over here, what's that? And we're comparing ourselves, we're learning, we're trying to figure out like, what do they do here? How are things run? And a lot of that plays into culture. As the leader, you set the temperature, and the cues you give off define the culture of the environment that you're leading. And since culture is key, if you're the kind of leader that's angry a lot, impatient, can't be interrupted, don't bother me, I'm not appreciative of anything people do, guess what happens? Over time, our team will descend down into that hellish place. But if you're the kind of leader who most of the time is joyful, appreciative, you see people, you try to help them and empower them, and all these other good things, your team will begin upward spiral to rise to that, to you and meet you there, and they're going to want to be like that. So everyone takes their cues from the senior leader explains the phrase that many of us hate or dread. Well, that's just not how we do it around here. Well, how do they know that? Let's say I'm new and I've been here a month and I'm like, hey, Sharon's birthday is next week. Why don't we do a big party for her? She does a great job. And then Bill in the cubicle next to me is like, oh, no, we don't do that here. Well, is it written down in the handbook? How does he know that we don't do birthdays here? And my friends, the answer is the cues that the senior leaders give off. We look to them to communicate to us what's allowed and what is not in the workplace. Now, this is scary to me because you and I are giving off those cues whether we know it or not. And that's why good leaders really work at making sure they're giving off the cues they intend. So if I give off QA, I want to make sure my team got QA. Not I give off QA, but then they got QB, and now there's a gap. Now it's conflicting and there's confusion, and nobody wants that. So let me ask you, what cues are you giving off? What are the corporate values and social rules in your work culture that aren't written, yet everybody knows? Are you patient? Do you allow people to interrupt you while you're hard at work? Do you celebrate people's successes and encourage them when they fail? Are they even allowed to fail in your culture? What are the cues that are creating these values for your culture? See, this really is where self-awareness comes in for us as leaders. It's a skill that requires work and feedback, but the good news is you can grow it and get better at it. Now, here's the thing. If you don't know what cues you're giving off, you know who does? Everybody else. That's right. Everybody else sees it because we're watching you. We see what you are saying and we see what you're doing. And I want to make sure that they align. And you're not saying one thing but doing another, and then you don't realize it. In that gap, if there's a contradiction between the cues you intend versus the ones you're giving off, I call that a blind spot. Those are blind spots. And in that gap, your team is going to have to figure out what you want. And they'll write what I call the ghost rules, which is the invisible narrative. And let me assure you, nobody wants that. Nobody wants ghost rules. They're not going to be super positive and believing the best. They're going to be toxic and the lowest common denominator. That's just how it is. If I get a text from you that says, hey, so call me, I'm going to think, oh my gosh, what is wrong? What is going on? Because I'm going to fill in the blank. And then you might be like, hey, I just had a great sandwich. Well, why didn't you just say that in the text? That scared me. So anyway, all right. That's a little bit about everyone takes their cues from the senior leader. Okay. That's why it's crucial to do the work of knowing your cues and being the kind of leader that consistently articulates healthy, articulate cues and a clear vision that provides the crucial stability that good work environments need. The second thing is I want you to work on your self-leadership. This is crucial to trust because you need to bring your best self every day. And if you don't do the work of filling yourself up, well, then you can't be poured out. Your team should be drinking from the overflow of your life. And my friends, I used to think this sounded selfish, but it's not. When you do that crucial work of fueling yourself every day, it helps you be consistent. I don't want us to be leaders who are like this. One day I'm great and one day I'm a wreck. I want to be predictable, where they know that when Asa comes to work, most days, because there's grace for when we have some bad moments, I'm going to be bringing my best self to work. Now, this really matters in terms of the quality of your team. And why is that? Because in leadership, you don't just attract who you want, you attract who you are. And now we're talking about the people that you have around you, helping you achieve that vision that God has given you for your workplace. Who you are is what people are drawn to. So that's why our self-leadership is so important. We need to be genuine in everything we do. Our teams hate inauthenticity. They read it as manipulation and fakery, and trust evaporates instantly when they pick up on it. So at the end of the talk, I'm going to give just a few suggestions for ways to fill our tank. So that's two truths about them. So now, or about us. Now let's talk about them. So self-awareness is about seeing those around you as well as yourself and knowing what you're doing. So my first truth about them is one that I think a lot of us know, but it's just good to be reminded as we start the new year. And it's this: everyone has a need to be known and valued. God created us that way. We were built to be in relationship with Him and with each other. So they need to know that they are valued. So how does that operate? I think it's two pieces, and it's actually pretty specific in how it works, but it's also simple. Number one, do you see me? Do you see them? Hey, do I see you? Do I see you over there? And they want you to see them. And they're saying, hey, do you see me? Do I matter to you? And then if the answer is yes, I see you, Then the next question is, well, do you hear me? Am I important enough that you would listen to me? So see them and hear them and find ways to value them. Horst Schulze describes it, the founder of Ritz-Carlton describes it this way. He says loyalty begins the moment. Hold on just a sec. They've told me that they can't see me, so I'm gonna make sure that they can see me here. Okay, is that better?
Okay, so what we're seeing is EOS webcam utility.
Okay, thank
Those
you.
words, we're not seeing your face anymore, but I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, thank you. I'm glad you told me. Okay, let me tell them that the camera. Let me just tell them the camera's off. Okay, give me just a second. Let me text them and tell them that the camera is turned off. I'm sorry about that. I'll keep going. I'll keep talking to us while they do that and check that for us. Okay, well now we can have a little bit of a radio show for us. All right, so all right, picking up on loyalty, what Horst Schulze said. So we're talking about knowing and valuing our teams. Let me say this, if I want to speak to the introverts for just a moment. If you are nervous by any of what I'm talking about in terms of relating to people and seeing them, knowing, trying to value them, I want to encourage you, because you don't have to worry if you're not a great extrovert or you've never been great with connecting with people. Let me give you John Maxwell's 3 questions that he says every potential follower would consider as a leader, what they want in their leaders. So here we go. The first question that they will ask is, do you like me? Do you like me? Why would I follow somebody that doesn't like me? And the second, so if you can say, yes, I like you, then that's great. Then the next question they have for you is actually what we're talking about today is, can I trust you? And the answer to that is, if it's, well, yes, you can trust me. If you can show them I'm trustworthy, their third question will be, well, can you help me? And if we can do that, then they will follow us. If you can show them, I like you, you can trust me, and yes, I will help you as best as I can. Now, it might not be as much as you want, but if I will help you get to the next level, I will help you through this season, then my friends, they will follow you. And here's the thing is, no one else is doing this for them. So they will do their best to try. If we can do our best to try and help them lead, then lead them, then they will follow us. By the way, what's happened is they tell me that the battery went out on the camera, so they're fixing it. But as long as you can hear me, I'm going to keep going. Shannon, can you still hear me? Yes. Okay, great.
Yes, I can still hear you. Sorry, I had to get my mute button
No,
on.
it's fine.
Keep going, Asa, you're doing great.
All right, back to the radio show. Okay, it's like a podcast in the car. This is great. So the second thing for a truth about them, after knowing and valuing them and the need for that, is I just want to take a moment for the core of our talk to talk about how trust operates. You see, okay, so one of the changes in our workplace that a lot of you have probably seen is increasingly, especially with millennials and Gen Z, is we have to earn the right to be followed. Now, I know a lot of you probably don't like that. I'm not even saying I agree with it. But this is some candid talk for us as we try to do our best leading our businesses. And that's just the way they are. It's not just I'm the boss, do what I say anymore. We can do that, but then what we're seeing increasingly is people will either vote with their feet and leave, or they'll quiet quit and just sit there, and they're not really going to do more than the minimum that's required. And I don't want you to have to get rid of people and spend 6 months trying to find somebody again. I want people to be activated and doing their very best for you every day when they come to work. So how do we earn the right to be followed? How do we, operate the best as we can in trust? Well, Todd Henry has some great work on this, where he says that trust is not like a bank account. It's a lot more like a water balloon. And he says that this water balloon will, it ebbs and it flows. It ebbs and it flows. and you put water in and you take water, so it's fragile and it's moving. And what you really don't want to do is puncture it, pop, right? And cause the balloon to explode. Because then, unfortunately, when that happens, now you're going to have to rebuild, like go all the way back to the beginning and rebuild trust. So trust isn't like a bank account. He found in his research, it's a lot more like a water balloon. The basic, oh yeah, and then one more thing about what he found, and they're changing the battery on the camera right now, so we think we're going to get it here in just a little bit. Is it's not big things that cause our team to lose trust in us. It's the little things in daily life that begins to like that they watch. They have to see consistency and honesty and clarity. And that's what I want to talk about for this last piece on trust and how it operates. The basic formula for trust has not changed. We need to be honest, we need to be clear, and we need to be consistent over time. Now, this is the Christian Employers Alliance webinar. So I'm going to assume that you're an honest person. So I'm not going to talk about that. You're a truth teller and you do your best to, tell it like it is and always be honest with people. But yet, why then would you have trouble with people maybe sometimes not believing you? Well, then the next piece is clarity. Are you clear in what you say and do? Do you practice being clear, abundantly clear, over and over again? Because we have to have clarity for them to trust us. And then the last piece is we need to be consistent over and over time. Our teams need to see us do what we say we'll do over and over again. And these three things will lead to abiding trust. So with this in mind, I want to now talk about how we can practice building trust in our daily lives as we respond in the future. All right, so 4 effective ways that I think that we can use. Number 1 is I want to grow self-awareness. What cues are we giving off to people? So we've talked about that, right? I want you to practice intentionally your self-awareness and what, like learning about how you come off to people. When you're speaking, what cues are you giving off? Are you smiling? Do you come off as sincere and authentic? Do you come off as fake and trying too hard? Most people are discerning and they'll read. If we're coming off as, trying too hard, they read it as manipulation. And they don't want to follow somebody that they think is trying to manipulate them. So how can you grow in this? Well, you could ask someone you trust to watch you and give you feedback and just say to them, hey, what cues am I giving off? How did I make you feel when you listened to me? If you've ever wondered why your communication never seems to go the way you planned, this actually might be the reason. You might be intending something, like you think you're smiling, but you're not, or you're always in a hurry or whatever. And this can just help you try to find that. So, okay, let me give you an example. So I spent 3 years, as you heard. Oh, great. Thank you, guys. I spent 3 years as a chief of staff for our DOT in Kentucky. The Kentucky Transportation Cabinet. And as the chief of staff, I was always saying things like, hey, come see me. I'm your chief. I'll help you. My door is open. Whatever you need, come and see me. And yet those first several months, it didn't really happen much. In fact, people, when they came to me, were like this, hey, Asa, I don't want to bother you, but I have a question. And I was always like, how am I coming off to people? Like, I'm telling them, I'm for you. I want to help you. I'm a nice guy. And then somewhere about 8 or 9 months into my tenure there, I was racing down the hall, trying to put out a fire, dealing with something. And I realized, wait a minute, I'm the only one walking this fast on this floor. And then I thought, but this is how I always walk, because that's just what I learned to do. Why is that? Because my first paying job out of college was working on Capitol Hill for my congressman, Ron Lewis. And those of you who've been on Capitol Hill, whether you work there or you've been up there, you're probably chuckling right now because you know what I'm referring to. People walk very fast in Rayburn, in Cannon, over in Hart. I mean, they're just zooming along because, they're very important. Now, some of them are. But others of them were like me, 22, 23, and I just wanted to look important. So I walked really fast. And I also didn't want to get run over in the halls by everybody else. So that kind of came with me. And the cue I was giving off, my friends, is I'm in such a hurry. Don't interrupt me because I'm busy and this is important. And actually, I didn't mean to give that cue off. So guess what? I started to slow down. And the next thing I knew, people weren't doing the, Asa, can I talk to you? It was, oh, Asa, can I ask you something? It was great. People began, I was more approachable. So that's an example of how growing in my self-awareness helped me align my cues. All right, number two, we've already talked about this, but I want you just to practice your authenticity and consistency this year. Lean into who you are and stay that way. You don't have to be some great leader that you think is the best, like Margaret Thatcher or President Reagan. I want you to be you. If you are nerdy and quiet, I want you to stay nerdy and quiet. But in the meantime, be confident, have fun with it, be transparent. Look, I love Star Wars. I'm a big Lord of the Rings nerd. I quote movies all the time. I just lean into that and go with it. And your team will see it's you being you, and they're going to be drawn to that. During the pandemic, I had we couldn't go to church every Sunday in person. So we'd watch our church, but my wife had grown up for 5 years with my father-in-law. When she was a little girl, my father-in-law was Dr. Charles Stanley's right hand. He was a teaching pastor for me, fill in when Dr. Stanley had to be gone. So during the pandemic, when our church went in, a lot of times Allison would start flipping over to Dr. Stanley. Now, I had always heard good things about him, but I'd never really watched him. And over time, I just fell in love with Dr. Charles Stanley. And one day I was like, why do I love Charles Stanley so much? Because, I grew up, I'm Methodist in these old, like 1950s style churches in the 80s. And, in college, I gravitated to like worship bands and like lights and just, Dr. Stanley standing there in a suit. He's got his Bible in his hand. He's got a map of the world behind him and a bunch of mahogany on the stage. That wasn't my style, but yet I loved him and it hit me. It was his authenticity. Every week, he would just spend time in the Word. He would let the Holy Spirit just speak to him. He would just let God teach him about this passage. And then he would stand there on Sunday and he would look in the camera and he would look at his congregation and say, hey, this is what the Lord is teaching me this week. And I want to share it with you. I want to tell you what I'm learning and invite you into that. And that humility, that genuineness was so attractive. And I just love Dr. Stanley and I miss him today. So work on being your authentic and consistent self. Number three is I want you to avoid ways that harm trust, that decrease it. The first is don't declare undeclarables. And what I mean by that is do your best not to give 100% assertion about something that then changes later. Don't do that. We lose credibility along the way. That can happen in business. I know that sometimes it can occur, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. Also, in the midst of that, don't be a superhero. I don't want you to pretend like you have all the answers and you can fix everything. When we don't have the answers, you know what? Just tell them. I was a professor for 8 years. I had millennials asking me questions about history all the time. I often, because history, and this is my favorite quote in 8 years of teaching from one of my history majors. At the very end, I said, what did you learn? What do you think? And tongue in cheek, she went, Asa, history is a long time. So I had a belly laugh in class because I thought that was brilliant. And because it's a long time, I don't have the answer to every question they had about history. So I would say, you know what, I don't know, but let's look it up. And we come back, we'll answer it. If you are in a meeting and that happens, just say, you know what, I don't know right now, but depending on its importance, I'll pull the budget director, I'll get my VP of whatever in here and the general counsel, and in an hour or tomorrow or whenever, I'll give you an answer. I'll tell you what I think. This is what we're working on. This is how we think we're going to solve it. But right now, I don't know yet. So that's how you can be honest, but then give them confidence going forward. So yeah, if you have to make a major change, and that, like I said, that does happen sometimes, just over communicate it. Just tell them, hey guys, this is why I gave you the 100% assertion. This is what I thought, and hey, it changed. I'm sorry. And they will understand. That's reasonable. And what I want you to do though, Jack Welch was famous for saying, don't just deliver, over deliver every time. And the Asa Swan version of that is don't just communicate, over communicate every time. Just over communicate it. I would rather my team leaves a meeting going, oh, I wish Asa would shut up. Like, yes, we get it. Then they leave the meeting and I'm like, I don't know if they got it or not. So avoid ways that forfeit trust. And the last one is short, but maybe the most important. Always empower. I want you to always empower your teams. Now, what does that look like on a daily basis? It means, so Marcus Buckingham says that a year is really 52 one-week sprints. And I love that. It's so true. Monday morning or whenever your team starts their work for the week, when you come in, gather them together and just say, what are you all working on this week? They will tell you. You might want to add a couple things or prioritize. And then you say, okay, that sounds good. What do you need from me? And then you give them your authority or your help, whatever it is. And once they've got it, you say, all right, you ready? All right, now go. Now do it. And check in with me as you need. Yeah, pull me in. I will do the things only I can do for you. Otherwise, you do it. I hired you not to do it my way, but to do it your way. And I'll help you as needed. So always empower. So for the last part of our last couple minutes, I want to share some thoughts on how to fuel your tank. These are some suggestions to help you with that. The first is going to come from one of my favorite leadership thought leaders, Juliet Funt, who's actually the daughter of Alan Funt, the creator of Candid Camera. She has an amazing concept called white space that I use in my personal life and I recommend to my clients. White space is a no goals, no rules, free experience, and I love this, to think the unthunk thought. It's putting some space in your day, whether it's 10 minutes or an hour, whatever you need, to just sit there and let your mind go where it needs to go. Now, Jack Welch would do this. He called it his staring out the window hour every day. He had a pen and a pad of paper on the umpteenth floor of the G building in New York. He would sit there and he would stare out his window and he would let his mind go to the important things they need to work on and he would write it down. And my friends, that's very important because for a couple reasons. First is when you let your mind do that, when you come into work every morning, a lot of times you have like 5 things you wanted to do today, and then you'll be driving home at 5 o'clock going, why did I only get to one of those? And Chris McChesney calls that the whirlwind of work. You come in and the urgent tries to push out the important. White space helps you prioritize what's long-term important that you need to spend time on and manage the urgent, which has to get done, but doesn't necessarily have to take precedence over what's really important. White space will help you do that. By the way, the second thing it helps you do is sleep at night. Because when you lay down to rest at night, you've already had time that you let your mind kind of go bleh and tell you what it needs to say, instead of when you're trying to go to sleep and your mind's just worrying and going. Also add margin to your day. That's another good one to preserve your limited energy each day. If you have 10 minutes between meetings or even 5 minutes, it gives a chance for the meeting to go over. And then let's say your 10 o'clock meeting goes to 10:54 instead of 10:50. Okay, I've got 6 extra minutes. You can go drink some water, pee, whatever, you can write something down. And then you come into the 11 o'clock having not in a panic because you're late, but prepared and having preserved some of that energy for the day for this next meeting. So that's number one. Number two is coming from another one of my favorite leadership thought leaders, Jo Saxton. And this is what she says for your self-leadership. What would your body say if it could talk to you? You're not a superhero. You need to deal with the things that you're going through. What would your body say to you right now? Would it say, I need to sleep? I need some exercise? Would it say, Asa, please eat a salad? Don't eat chocolate all the time. That might not be hypothetical, by the way. What would it say? Your leadership lives in your body. You have one body and your leadership lives in it. You need to take care of your body and what you're going through. Stay healthy and refreshed. And then finally, for this point, this is something that I want to suggest to you based on what I'm seeing in the workplace today. I want you to be in movement community. So that's what I call doing life with the people that God has sent to you for this season. Who champions you? Who loves you? Who is for you? And I don't mean they're just like your friend. They are with you. And they're people that God has sent to you. So be in movement community. Why is this important? The enemy's always trying to isolate us and get us over here away from the Lord. What is the biggest surprise that I find most leaders find when they become the leader? It's the loneliness of leadership. Nothing gets heads nodding more when I speak or I'm training, when I talk about being lonely as a leader. When you feel the weight of not just taking care of your team, but knowing that Their families are affected by what you do because the buck stops here. The loneliness of leadership is pushed back, it's pushed away by being in movement community. All right, so I'm going to close with a story and then I'm going to pray with us. My favorite thought that I heard all year last year came from Alistair Begg, and it's a spiritual thought. He was, he's a Scotch-American pastor out of Cleveland. Many of you probably listened to him, but he had a clip go viral talking about my favorite passage in scripture, which is Luke 23:39 through 43. The thief speaking to Jesus on the cross. And if you remember, the thief rebukes the other criminal for getting after Jesus and telling him, get us off of here. And the thief says, he doesn't belong here, but we do. And then he said, remember, he says, Jesus, will you remember me when you come into your kingdom? And even though the Lord is in agony and is in just the center of this horrible test, he looks at him and he says, today you will be with me in paradise. So Alistair Begg asked the question, what was it like to be the thief entering into heaven? And he says, Jesus comes in and everybody's celebrating because he did it. The Son of God did. This is so exciting. He did it. And then they're like, who's this guy? And the angel's like looking through the list and, well, I don't have his name. And then they're like, well, what, how many Bible studies did you go to? Did you tell me about what you know about him? And the guy's like, I don't really know him very well. I didn't go to any Bible studies. Well, did you read the Old Testament? Were you a disciple? What did you do? And, his answer over and over is, no, I haven't done this. No, I haven't done that. And then the angel's finally like, well, then why are you here? And the thief says, because the man on the middle cross said that I could be here. The man on the middle cross said that I could come. And my friends, that's what this is all about. He trusted in Jesus. He saw the things we're talking about in the Lord. He believed him. Even hanging there, he put his trust in Jesus and he was saved. Leadership is never easy, especially right now. But it's also never been more important. By intentionally working to rebuild the trust of your employees through authentic leadership that practices self-awareness and consistent communication, I believe we can help our teams regain their trust in their work and the visions that we've laid out, empowering them to fire on all cylinders, love what they're doing, and unleash their God-given potential. Now let's pray. Dear Lord, I thank you for this day. I thank you for all the people that are on this webinar and the work that you are using them to do. Jesus, I thank you that you are with us. And because you are with us, we don't have to be afraid or nervous, but we can have the victory. And we just want to say we love you. And once again today, we surrender our lives to you. Move in power. Help us to rebuild trust. May our workplaces be places where you are lifted up, that you might draw all men unto yourself. And I thank you for the teachable spirits of everybody listening. Thank you for Shannon and her team and CEA and all you're doing. Lord, we love you and we pray these things in your mighty name. Amen. Shannon?
Yes, thank you so much, Asa. My goodness, there is so much to go on, and I don't even know where to begin in terms of the questions. But I want to remind everyone to put your questions in the chat, and we will get to as many of those as we can. So, Asa, your comments about the pace of DC. Oh, my word, I totally get that because
Yeah.
I move really fast and I have
Right.
to consciously, deliberately slow down because I have lived and worked in DC my entire career. And so my normal pace is drive, 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 drive. And so I really appreciate your saying that and that awareness of that, because that really is critical to consciously check yourself and the tendencies you have just from your own leadership growth and development and circumstances. So that is fabulous. So I have two questions for you, and then we'll go on to the questions from everyone else. The first is a question that we experience at CEA, and that is that we are an entirely remote team. And so I'm curious what advice you would have for those of us who are working with entirely remote teams in trying to do that building of trust and connection and empowerment. It's a little harder than when you're in an office together and you can just stick your head in their office and say, hey, let's go get coffee, or just sit down and chat with them. So speak to that.
Great question. So you're right, it is harder. It would be more challenging to have authentic connection, but we can do that. It's amazing that we have kind of Jetsons technology now, where we can see each other, and, talk to each other face to face. That, just that face to face experience is so different than like a phone call. I'll tell you, Shannon, I am a really big believer in finding ways to show appreciation that you enjoy. The former CEO of Home Depot, for the 7 years he was CEO, he turned the whole company around solely by just handwriting notes to people.
Mm,
And he wrote on average 68 a week.
wow.
And, and some people on your team, that wouldn't register as much, but others, like the word gift people, like the 5 love languages, it would. But what's amazing, by the way, is that his board credits that as the number one thing that turned Home Depot around.
Mm,
And something, by the way, that I wouldn't have expected. Nobody knows who the CEO in New York is, right? When you're going across the country. So he would walk into like the Wichita, Kansas Home Depot, and no one knows the boss is in
right,
here. And
right.
he would see a handwritten note of his hanging up on a workstation. And the reason why I share that is because it creates an upward spiral. Because if I see that Jeff got one, I'm like, well, I want a handwritten note. And by
Right.
the way, it wasn't, hey, dear Jeff, good job. He had his senior VPs tell the VPs, tell the regional guys, tell the store managers, send us things that are laudable. Send us things that the team we want to applaud.
Right.
And then he would say, I know that you did X. And that's what Jeff had done.
Mm,
So they would hang them up. And I love that. So I would just say finding ways to show that, hey, I still see you, even though we're 1,000 miles away.
right.
Finding those for that person. That's basically, I would say, the best way to do that. Great question.
So you talked about various exercises like whiteboarding, and I love that too, because I start my day with quiet, right? With my Bible and quiet, and have that thinking time, because if I get into my day, it's really hard to find that thinking time.
Right.
So I love that. But how do you encourage leaders to encourage their teams to do those kinds of exercises also?
Hmm. Well, I mean, obviously you can't control them, like you're saying, you're implying. Yeah, how do you get them to I would say just leading by example, showing them the power of what works for you, and encourage them to find a way that works for them.
Right.
And I'm a nighttime exerciser. I don't do it enough. I have 2 kids under the age of 6. I'm trying to get back into it, but I exercise better at night. A lot of people, it's in the morning, but I've just always been that way.
Sure.
So I've just accepted it. And by the way, I also write better at night. When I was writing my dissertation, I did a lot more in the evening because I
Sure.
think better.
You and Catherine, she's the
Yeah.
person too. I'm the crack of dawn person on our
Right.
team, so we cover the 24 hours between the two of us.
But I think, yeah, like you're saying, one of the things I've learned is generally, if you don't like it, you're not going to do it long term. Now, you don't have to love it, because discipline, we can discipline ourselves, but finding what you like or fits is just really key. So that's what I would say, like ways to have, and things, you don't even have to do white space every day. Like even if it's a couple days a week, just fine, and you can ease into it because we're all busy. But these were supposed to make our lives easier.
Right.
And less busy. And instead, we're busier than ever.
Of course.
And by the way, those phones make it harder to see and value people because we're down here instead of seeing them and what they're doing. So they've also impeded us from showing that value of just the I see you and you matter to me type hue that we want to give off.
Right. So when you're a leader and you're actually meeting with someone, the phone should not be sitting on the table in front of you where at any moment you could be interrupted.
Right.
It should be on a
Right.
desk over
Right.
there where it's not a distraction and it's clear that you're actually focused on that individual. That's helpful. So would you expand on that white space issue? This is a question coming in. How do you explain that to your team?
Okay, great question. So, all right. Basically, the way it works is you sit down and you try to get quiet. And now that might be actually playing some music in the background if you're one of those in college that you did better with the music and you studied versus someone like me that may be classical, but otherwise I need quiet. And you just kind of let your mind go where it wants to go. And at first you're going to get the things from today, like kind of the, did I leave the iron on type stuff?
Mhm.
But then you'll find your mind will begin to bring things forward that it needs to, like, you want to think about.
Right,
That, and I think you need to begin writing it down,
right,
because now you're getting it out. You know, you're making a list, or you're just, it's a way to get it out of here so it doesn't just percolate over and over.
right.
And that's something that Juliet is a master at this. She uses Post-it notes. She'll put them for each thing that helps her then go and she can take it off if she's working on it. She can, if
Right.
it, rip it if it's done. But it's really good to write it down. It also is you putting an action to the thought.
Right.
Like, I'm going to do something about this by at least writing it down. And a little like life hack, some of those you can then even hand them off to people. Hey, will you go work on this? It was in my head, but I trust you. Here, Shannon, will you do it? Yeah, so I'd be great for that.
Mhm.
So that's really what it is. It's you don't need to be afraid of it. We're so busy. There's so much noise in our culture. I really do think a lot of it is evil. Like, the devil doesn't want us to be quiet.
Right.
When does Elijah hear God speak, right? In the quiet, in the
Yeah, I
still
think that's a
voice.
discipline, right?
Right.
The
But as you
discipline.
practice it, like with anything, it gets easier. And
Right.
I want to say again, it will help you sleep better. It
Right.
really will. You will have less things in here at night that your mind wants to talk to you about because you already did it earlier in the day.
Well, one of the things that I found during my tenure at HHS, the first 2 or 3 months I was there, I just felt like I was running constantly. And I learned after a couple of months, I have to schedule in, I have to block time on my schedule in advance to have time to think. Because I'm supposed to be leading, I'm supposed to be decision making. But if I didn't block time to be able to think, I
Mhm.
literally would run all day,
Mhm.
doing so many things, and yet not having any kind of time to think. So I found as a leader, it really helps me to actually block time to think. And it may be that would help some of our other leaders as well.
Shannon,
Well,
so did I.
there is so much stuff that we could touch on here. I love so many of the things that you shared. But we will stop here. And any other questions that come in, we will be happy to connect people with you.
Great.
We will share this webinar both on our website and with any who registered who were not able to join us today. So thank you so much for what you shared. You've given us a lot to think about and to really seek to implement. And so I appreciate the experience and expertise you bring in this area and the energy and hopefulness that you bring as well. So thank you. God bless you. Thank you everyone for joining us. We will see you next month on February 15th for our next webinar. God bless you all.